Friday, and it's our new talk. And we have from down on under, John Armstrong. So,
G'day, Arnold. How are you
welcome.
today?
Great,
Thank you very
great.
much.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's nice to be able to contribute something back. Hey, look, today what we're going to do is something that I was inspired to get into following Pete's discussions on using Ajax to create a Gmail type search. A couple of weeks back, Pete did part one of his two-part Ajax or his search using or creating a Google-like email interface. Now, when I looked at it, I thought that's absolutely brilliant. But what I really wanted was to be able to access my databases, my raw databases, rather than having to perhaps just get a snapshot of a little bit of data loaded into a memory queue and then to view it from there. I want to be able to do a live search on the main database. So at the end of the webinar, I did send a slightly cheeky email to Pete where I said, can you tell me how to do this or show us how to do that? And he came back with exactly the right answer. Here's a few tips. Now you go figure it out yourself. Which fair enough answer too. So I went away and played round, starting off from where Pete was, and ended up in using his tips, but coming back from a slightly different direction. So what we have now is the ability to just type, a bit like when you're doing searching for something on Google, and it will come up with the result set live from the underlying databases. So if I start typing Boeing, up come all these Boeing aircraft. I've got here a database full of all of the aircraft that the FAA, or aircraft makes and models that the FAA have on file. In fact, as a quick diversion, I wanted to try and get a data set, and it was actually damned hard to get a big, reliable data set. So here's a quick tip, slight diversion. If you want to find a good data set, then just search for FAA aircraft database. And in fact, this is a good example. This sort of searching here is exactly the sort of thing I was hoping to get available in WINDEV. When you look in here, you can see you can download thousands and thousands of aircraft, the individual aircraft, or in this case here, it's just the makes and models. One quick tip, it doesn't actually display the download link, which goes in here when you do it through Google's Chrome. So if you grab a different browser like Opera or IE, when you go into that exact same page, here you end up with a link to the aircraft registration database, and that's got all the tail numbers for all the aircraft, I think, in North America, and it's useful just as a preset, fully set up relational database in CSV format. So I use that to populate my database of all of the aircraft manufacturers in the US. So anyway, back to where we're up to. So what we've got here is an incremental search that's working pretty close to the way that Google works. So we can look up something and it goes pretty quick. It's searching for all of the manufacturers. It's unusual how there's a whole bunch of manufacturers with names you've never heard of. That's because whenever you have a home-built aircraft, the manufacturer's name goes in there as well. So the person who built it, their name goes in there, which there's some interesting things I discovered in there. So, okay, enough of the introduction. Let's start getting into it. Now, the first point is that I've sent you guys a copy of the actual database and the WINDEV or WebDev project. So you should be able to have a reference to just look at the code and build the same sort of search in the future. We'll get into the actual app and start talking about how we created this thing. So first step, I guess, is to restore the application from the WINDEV or WebDev backup. Firstly, to create the backup, I just went into Tools, Save a Project, and save the project to a zip file. Everything is done for you. Just follow the default settings, and bang, you got yourself a nice backup. It'll even, for those who haven't perhaps done it in the past, it'll even append the date and time onto the end of it if you wish, or have it just as a straight zip file with the name of the project as the name of the zip file. To restore this project, what we need to do is as follows. Let's shut this thing down so that we don't have any project open at all. Restoring is as simple as following your nose in WebDev tools. Where are we? Restore a project. Go through, point to where the project was backed up to. In this case, it was my documents, and it's this one here. It's the one that I've just sent you, backup of incremental search. Open that up. It's going to put it into a folder. I believe you're best to probably create a folder name, or make sure there is a folder name for it to go into. And next, and bang, you'll have yourself a restored version of the application, which you can work through from there. So when we actually open the app up, I've got it sitting in a folder which is easiest to actually pick it from the main pick list of applications, as opposed to try and search for it on my PC. We'll open up and have a look at exactly how it's running. Okay, this app's basically just got a single page in it and a database. Perhaps have a look quickly at the database so we can see what's in there. Literally, it's just a single table which contains the manufacturer's code, the manufacturer, and the model of aircraft. We'll open up good old Microsoft ABSYS and have a look at what's actually in the database. Here is that aircraft table, and we've got the manufacturer's name, or the code, the manufacturer's name, and the model. There in alphabetical order are all of the manufacturers. Here are the individual aircraft models. Now, indeed, the database you get from the FAA has got slightly more columns in it, but I've stripped it down to that. Yep.
Are you unaware of the WD map tool?
No,
Go back over to your analysis.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. I just wanted everyone to understand you actually edit the data file with WD map.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to use Access, just
I like that. The catchword for today.
Every opportunity I get to eliminate, a use of Access, I feel like I've had a good day.
Oh dear. Hey, I know what you mean, but I actually believe that Access is a fantastic tool when used for what it was designed for, and that's something for doing ad hoc queries and browsing of data. What it's not is a database, as you well know. So anyway, but that is a fantastic feature, the WD map, and we can have a look through and see the same data there. Now. Actually, one interesting thing, when I imported the data, I got really frustrated because everything seemed to be searching in an unusual way, and it came down to you need to be a little bit careful when you are setting up your indexes to say whether they're access sensitive or not. For example, I was looking up an aircraft, say the F-16. I'd do F-16 because that's what I'd seen in the database, and the darn thing didn't accept the dash, and it turned out I had made it access sensitive or insensitive, or anyway, whatever I'd done, it was doing things wrong. So check to see how your when you're using a hyperfile database, how your accents and spaces are treated when you're doing searches. You may just get some unpredictable results. For example, I was looking up somebody who had a name that started with ABC, and it also brought up somebody else who had the initials A space, B space, C space, which is what I wasn't expecting. So it's just a little thing that tripped me, but all good from there. So that's sort of the bread and butter. That's our database. Next, we'll check out what's happening under the search screen. Okay, we've changed something there. Let's apply it and use the update, and we've probably turned on the feature I was describing with the case sensitivity, or sorry, accent sensitive. My French is not that good, so I presume I've clicked OK there. Okay, back to these the aircraft search page. What this page consists of is basically 3 or 4 components. We've got an entry field in which we receive the typed text. we've got below it a looper. To be honest, I've not used loopers before until I watched Pete's webinar, and I now understand them, and I think they're absolutely brilliant. I'm going to use them all the time now. I've used typically just the tables in the past, but what we have here, it's a little bit hard to see, but there is a cell. Within the cell is a looper. Within the looper is a button that we can press when we want to select something. In fact, if we open it up here, we can see there is a cell which I've called search results. Within the search results is a looper, and within that we've got a few columns in that looper, including a button, which is the button we can see here. We'll come back to that in a bit more detail in a second. We also have a couple of other things to help us. We've got a hidden edit field on the screen up here. This is normally hidden, but I've made it displayable. And secondly, we've got a hidden button on the screen. Now, let me now describe the problems we needed to solve in order to do this. When somebody is entering text onto a web page, there is little or no link between what's happening on the actual page on their browser, what's happening on their server. So if we just fire up this app very quickly, under normal circumstances, the server doesn't really know, or in fact doesn't know what is happening on the browser until you click a button to submit your changes. Now, as we want to do something incrementally, it ain't going to work to have to press a button all the time, refresh the entire page. So what we need to do is somehow get the data that's getting entered into this search box here to the server. The server's got to do a few queries to look all of this up, and then it's got to update the results. And to do that, we use the magic of Ajax. And Ajax, in essence, is the ability to transfer data in the background from the screen to the server and have some interaction from there. The best way of explaining it in detail is just to say it's magic. A bit like a CPU is, I've got no idea how they work, they're magic. Andy Grove figured it out, he knows how it works, and Mr. Moore. So when you start up a computer, the CPU does your stuff for you. When you want to transfer information from your screen to your server, Ajax is the mechanism that's used to transfer it. So Ajax gets around the problem of us being able to transfer information from the screen to the server. The reason we've got to get it to the server is we want to run a search in the background. Now, we'll just have a quick look at some of the code or what's happening in behind here. Actually, there's one other building block I need to talk about, and that's the queries that are going to locate the data. So just really quickly, we'll divert from the screen because we're going to be calling these queries in a minute. I'll just give a 1 minute overview as to what we've got in here. So in order to retrieve these aircraft, I retrieve where the word contains the name of, starts with the letters that have been typed, like Boeing, or if it contains those, or if it contains it. And in essence, what we're going to do is search a query that's going to find every aircraft that's manufactured that starts with something. Once we've filled that up, we'll look for contains. So just to run that through there, if we use, I know there are a few aircraft that start with Pete, a few aircraft manufacturers starting with Pete. We've looked for Peter, and then, or in fact, we'll try a different name, Mary. Those are will come up the various aircraft that start with the word Mary, and that should fill up. Well, in fact, there's only those 4 that start with it. It's found these names up here out of MARY and the name glider there. So it's doing, firstly, it starts with search and then a contains search. And so to do that, it was simple enough to make a couple of queries, have a look at them, and it looks for where this is the contain search here, where the model contains, actually, sorry, let's start with the simplest starts with. Basically, the search just says the manufacturer starts with a parameter called starts with in that query there. The contains query is slightly more complex. What I do is I'm actually looking at both the model and the manufacturer. So I say it's where the model contains the word Mary, for example, and the manufacturer, somewhere in that it contains Mary, but I also do, but it doesn't start with Mary. The reason for that is I don't want to get my results repeated from my starts with. So my starts with looked for anything that starts with, my contains, I just want to exclude those which I've already found, having done the starts with. It'll come slightly more apparent in a second. I hope I'm not confusing you. How are we going, Arnold?
Good. That's pretty tricky. I like that.
Cool. And I'm a query junkie. I just love using queries. I might show you how you can actually, when you're actually running an app or debugging it, you can actually call your query and run it even though you're in the middle of debugging or the app is running live in the background. They're wonderful. So anyway, we've got these two queries here. Right, let's have a look under the bonnet and see exactly how we're doing this. If we right click on the entry field and go into the code, we see we've got these green highlighted browser procedures. So we're doing everything under this button on the browser, no server procedures. And we've got, as Pete pointed out, a key up as a trigger to start the search. And also I'm using the on click will also fire off this local browser procedure. A quick tip here, and by default, I don't think the key up shows as an embed point. You can select embed points by clicking this ellipse here, and you can add different embed points. If we wanted to include the double click, for example, add that, and now that will be listed. We'll just modify and continue. It's now added double click somewhere in there, which will allow us to also, if we really wanted to, put some code under the double click. We don't, but that's all good. So this is the little procedure which fires everything off. Now, press the F2 button when highlighting a procedure you've written, and we'll open up the browser procedure. Browser procedure, not server procedure. Here is that browser procedure. I've tried to stick some comments in there, but they tend to make it perhaps a little bit harder to read rather than easier to read. I don't know. Anyway, what we're doing is this: firstly, I'm changing a little image on the screen. You may recall this little thing here, the timer image. I'm changing that so that it's now no longer visible. I changed the mouse, sorry, I'm testing to see whether it's visible or not. I'm actually using the visibility as a flag to say whether we're in a search or not. We don't want to keep on firing off a new search if we're currently within a search. So there is a flag which sets the image from visible to invisible, or invisible to visible when we start a search. And I keep on testing to see if it's still visible to know whether I'm in a search. And that's my flag that I use to know whether I should fire off a new search all the time. So it's not only for the eye candy of seeing a spinning icon, it's also used as a flag in this particular instance. I also am adding the cursor weight. If you hover over that little image, again, I'm using that as a flag to which we'll see later on, which actually says whether there is a query in process right now. So having the image visible is a flag I'm using to know that somebody is typing something and wants to find something. Having the actual cursor, if you happen to hover over that image as a cursor weight, is what I'm using as a flag to say that we are actually executing a query right now and waiting for that to return. And we'll see that in a second. Next, I'm also checking to make sure that what's actually just been typed is not what was previously searched for. And so that's this field here, which is, I've called it the current search buffer, which corresponds to what we see up here. So as I type, it is checking to see what I'd previously typed in this search buffer here. Right, hope we're not too confused. Here I'm populating that search buffer. Now here's where the actual magic happens. Last week we saw Pete showing us how to use Ajax Execute. Ajax Execute will take text or information from the browser, pass it through to a server procedure and allow a server procedure to do something. The difference between Ajax Execute and Ajax Execute Asynchronous is that, excuse me, Ajax Execute will prevent anything else from happening until the server process has returned. Ajax execute asynchronous will allow the user to carry on typing and the server process just happens in the background. A wonderful little device which without it we just wouldn't be able to do this sort of thing. Now the anatomy of this is that it takes two procedures. The first one is what's the server doing, which is called start searching, and then when the server has finished, the screen needs to know, okay, I can now show some results, or I now need to do something, I now know that it's finished. So there are two parameters here. The second parameter we're looking at here is the browser procedure that gets called when the server procedure has finished running. And in fact, the server procedure can pass a result to the browser procedure for something to happen. The third parameter we see here is just the parameter that's getting passed to the server procedure. So is everybody sort of keeping up with that, or have I confused everybody with that? We've got Ajax asynchronous procedure based on information it gets off the screen. It will then, when it's finished, call this cleanup procedure at the end, which is a browser procedure, and this is the variable that it passes. And without that little bit of magic, the only way to get information from the screen to the server would be to have to put a button on the screen. And when you put a button on the screen, you press that, it goes and refreshes the entire screen, which is not a good thing in this instance here. We want it to all happen nice and seamlessly in the background. So let's start. Firstly, we'll have a look inside the start searching, and then we'll see what that does and work through from there. So to go into that server procedure, we'll press the F2 button and it opens up. Okay. What we end up doing here is we receive what I've called string to find, which are the characters that are sitting in that entry field, and we set a few flags. We set this cursor on the icon to say cursor wait. We're using it as a flag. This is how many records we want to find, or sorry, this is a counter of how many records we've found, and this is the maximum of our result set. So we're going to have 10 results in there. You could change that to 5, 7, 20, whatever you wanted. Next, we empty our looper because we're starting a fresh search. We say, is there anything actually being searched for? If there's not, we might as well just quit right out of the whole thing now and just say nothing found, because it won't find anything that's blank. However, if there is something to find, then we do two things. Firstly, we execute the starts with query, and then if we haven't found 10 records, we then execute the contains query down here. And in fact, there's one extra thing that happens at the bottom of the contains query. The starts with query will do everything nicely in alphabetical order, because I happen to set up the query so it's in alphabetical order. The contains query will tack onto the end of it whatever it finds from there. And so our result set will not really be in alphabetical order anymore. So just towards the end there, we tell it to sort our looper into aircraft order. So it's kind of not rocket science, but it's it is a little bit confusing. As we go through the queries, we basically just loop through, counting up to 10, and we add to our looper this here, which will add the aircraft manufacturer, a bracket, manufacturer's code, and then the actual model of aircraft. It actually puts into a different column here, taking one of the tips from Pete's example last week, a hidden value of the primary key of the database, and this can be used if you wanted to fetch something or do something from there. So just to explain what I mean there, if we look at the description of the looper, I think I've got the button rather than the looper, but anyway, your looper can contain hidden columns, and those can be useful if you're wanting to retrieve data. So back into the code here, we'll just dive into the code under here again and go into our trigger a search and go into the first step, which is to start searching. And here we are going through all of our queries. Now those queries might take some time to run, and by the time you run them, the user's typed a few more letters. And indeed, Under normal circumstances, the browser's got absolutely no idea that the server has finished executing one or two queries and is now ready to display the looper. I say at this point, the user's browser is blindly unaware that the server is now just finished doing its bit, populating the looper. However, thanks to that, and I forgot to carry on typing, but that should have been through the magic of Ajax or something like that. What happens next is that it will then call that other procedure. So we'll use Control F2 to take us back to the previous screen. When, as I was saying, with this wonderful Ajax asynchronous command, start searching is the server procedure. When that's finished, it automatically calls this procedure here called end searching. And so we'll click on the F2. This is a browser procedure rather than server procedure. F2, and here's what this little puppy does. Firstly, it changes the cursor on that little spinning icon to cursor automatic. It used to say cursor arrow wait. The reason for doing that is that that is my semaphore to say that there is no longer any active queries running in the background. Then the next step is a little bit tricky. This is another cool feature I like in the whole process. Tricky at first, but when you get your head around it, really, really handy. The next thing that the browser procedure does, it clicks a button. We had a hidden button on the screen, which I've called hidden display search. So when the queries have stopped running and they've returned a result set, we then execute this hidden display search button. So let's have a look and see what happens under that button. A button can't be pressed from server code, but of course a browser code, you can make the browser code click a button. So here we go. We'll have a look and see what's under this button here. Right click, code, and we've got two bits of code sitting under this button. One is server code and one is, browser code at the top here in green, and server code. Actually, I'd forgotten to mention, with these entry fields, we need to have Ajax enabled. In that little bit of magic under the bonnet that is able to transfer bits of text or values, variables between the browser and the server. If that's not enabled, then that little bit of magic won't work. Let's have a quick look to see what's happening here. We'll look at the server code first. What the server does, pretty simple. It counts to see if there are any or more than 0 values sitting in the list of, records sitting in the looper queue. If there are, it displays the looper starting with the first record and makes the results true. If it's false, in other words, our filtering has now found no records that match, then it hides that queue. And in fact, I was saying that you could actually, I intend to do this sort of thing, extend the code here so that if you're looking for something within your database app and it's not found, then you could perhaps offer to say, John Armstrong not found, like to add a new customer now or whatever. So that way, in fact, you can control people from adding a duplicate record by having them start off their entry by entering the product code or whatever that they want to add. If it finds it, then if it finds that product code, then of course it will never get to exposing the insert button. If it doesn't find the product code, then you can have an insert button ready to pop it up. Anyway, just a little aside there, but that could be quite a nice little addition. So the server side, when it's finished searching, will do that. On the browser side, however, what may have happened while we were off running our queries, it's quite possible that the user has typed a few more characters into the entry field. So what we need to do on the browser side is go away and run a few more, or run the query section again to ensure that it gets new characters. So, for example, what we're talking about there, there I've cleared out the word Mary, and it's sort of catching up to getting, because it's running queries trying to find. It seems to have stopped. I wonder if I've killed the server somehow. Anyway, meanwhile, back at the ranch, one moment caller, as they say, just fire the whole thing up again, and I'll try and make that describe what, or run what I was trying to describe there. So as you type, you may end up getting ahead of the actual box that is displaying below there with the results in it. So in order to accommodate the fact that new characters might have been typed while we were running the queries in the background, go back and find the code under the button here. What we end up doing is testing to see, is the value under the EDT control the same as what we just last searched for? If it's not, then we set the mouse cursor of that little searching icon to the weight icon. We then make the two variables match, and then we just execute this little bit of Ajax asynchronous code yet again. If on the other hand both those were identical, we make that spinny icon hidden and we're finished. So that is pretty much the anatomy of what we're doing here. Just to quickly refresh: accepting characters into here, enabling visibility of this little icon here as a flag to say that we've started searching. The Ajax asynchronous process we looked at under this procedure here. Ajax asynchronous calls start searching. When it's finished searching, it does our end searching. The end searching clicks that hidden button on the screen. Sounds rather roundabout, but hey, it works. And the hidden button on the screen will do one of two things. It'll either find that the user's typed some more information, so we just go around the loop again, or alternatively, it does clean up stuff and just displays the result set. Now, you don't have to, or it's interesting, you can change around the type of searching you can do. If we look at our search here by going into, we'll just quickly dive into the start searching procedure. If we comment out this section, which is doing the contain searching, it'll speed up things quite significantly, because now we're no longer doing a contained. It'll only be starts with that runs and fills up our little
I think you missed an end there.
You're dead right there, Pete. Thank you. Well done. Hey, I wish I had a voice operated debugger like that sitting over my shoulder all the time, Pete. Save me a bunch of time. So now you can type much quicker and it will get the result. Interestingly, I came across this little puppy here where it puts a nice X to clear your searches quickly for you. And that was extraordinarily easy to implement when you know where the darn thing is. So if we go quickly back to our screen here, in this entry field here, right-click description, and there is this HTML5 search control. When that's turned on, we end up getting the that little icon there. What's odd is if I run this search in a different browser like Internet Explorer, we'll find that, and there is no search up, no button there. So it's something that happens in modern HTML5 browsers. Obviously, it considers this version of Explorer, which is probably 9, I think, a little bit too old. But hey, it's not the end of the world at all. All the other functionality works just fine, and yeah, that's what's that. There are a couple of other minor things with this button here. It's actually important, I forgot to mention this before, it's important that you change the default behavior. Sorry, that button there needs to run server code to send the information back to the server. So it's important you don't change it so that it does nothing. It needs to pass the information back to the server. What else do we need to know about this? really I've rushed through, hopefully in a way that was not too confusing for people, the idea of a browser being totally separate from a server. We wanted to do server stuff like as in run queries on our database. We wanted to signal that we've finished running queries and let the browser know that we've just finished, and so do the next stuff. We then want to do a bit of checking to see has the user typed some more stuff. Then we'll run through the whole palaver again. So slightly roundabout, but what you guys might find useful is because you've got this example app, you can use it as a basis to build your own searches in the future. So hey, look, I've talked far too much. Any comments or questions?
Type your questions in the chat, or if you have a mic turned on, go ahead and turn it on and talk.
I've got one suggestion. Yeah, I've got one suggestion for you. It was interesting. You talked about your second query was a little slower.
Yeah.
I suspect the problem there is your and not starts with.
Yep.
That kind of a query gets very convoluted for the optimizer. I think what I would do instead is not do the and not starts with, and then after your for each loop here, just do a looper seek for that manufacturer code, and if you find it already in your looper, just do a continue. In other words, let the query find it. It's not like it's, at most it's going to be 4 or 5 that you're going to have to skip over, which that'll probably be quicker than trying to eliminate them out of the query.
Sure. No, look, I understand exactly what you're saying there. It means the code is not so clean, it's a few extra lines of code in here, but for the sake of efficiency, that's a really good idea. The other thing that I realized as well was that if you're looking for, say, a search of ABC and it finds 4 records for ABC, and then you look up ABCD, it finds nothing for ABCD, there's no real point in then carrying on searching for ABCDEFG, because what I'm trying to say there is got an empty result set. There is, if you add more characters, you ain't going to find nothing more. So it would also be perhaps useful to put a little bit of tricky code up here to know where you drew a blank from any result set, and just don't bother iterating through the loops if that occurs, if you understand what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that I think Google does that would take some playing with is if you really watch Google, they don't start that search immediately. It's like a quarter of a second or something. So in other words, if I type ABC real quick, they're not starting that search until I get to C. And how they're doing that is by keeping track of when you pressed each key, and if there's been more than a quarter second or whatever that magic timer is, then they go ahead and launch the search. And I think that code you could do pretty quick in your start trigger or fire trigger or whatever you called that.
I mean, yes, yeah. No, that is a really good idea. So literally see how long has elapsed since the previous keystroke was seen. If it's shorter than 10 milliseconds or whatever you decide it is, then don't bother just firing off a search, because you know that there's more to come. So that's a great idea. That would improve it immensely.
You'd probably have to have a timer event running that you're resetting every time they press a key, and then that timer event would actually fire off your search when it's gone a quarter of a second without them having hit another key and your 2 searches don't match.
Right.
So yeah, I think that would be fairly doable. And then, the only thing to play with is that interval of, and it'll be small. It'll be, a tenth of a second or a quarter of a second.
Sure.
but it'll make a huge difference.
Yep, no, that is a really good idea. Hey, look, the other thing that I was inspired to try, but it was beyond the scope of what I could do in time for this, was if you look at a Google, what I want to show in Chrome, it shows up a lot better. When you do a Google search, what is now you see how as you type it, the results are light and then bold for what you haven't typed yet, and light for the bits you've already typed. Now that could be really useful in a contained search to see whereabouts that word Mary fell within that primary glider or whatever. Now, using that tricky stuff you were doing, Pete, with the spaces and the fields that made up your Google searching, Google email type techniques, I think that possibly